It was a dark and stormy night, and I was home alone. The wind howled outside, and the rain beat against the windows like tiny fists. I sat on the couch, trying to relax with a book, but the flickering lights made it hard to concentrate. Every now and then, the power would cut out completely, plunging the house into darkness before the lights struggled back to life. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself that it was just a storm. But then I heard a noise coming from the basement. It was a low, creaking sound, almost like a whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind or the house settling, but the noise continued, growing louder and more insistent. I put my book down and got up to investigate. "It's probably just the wind," I muttered to myself, trying to stay calm. I walked slowly to the basement door, each step echoing in the silent house. The door to the basement was at the end of a narrow hallway, and as I approached, I felt a chill run down my spine. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. The basement was pitch black, and the light switch at the top of the stairs did nothing. "Great, just great," I whispered. I grabbed a flashlight from a nearby drawer and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. I descended the stairs slowly, the wooden steps creaking under my weight. As I reached the bottom, the noise stopped abruptly. I swept the flashlight around the room, but everything seemed normal. Just the usual clutter of old furniture, boxes, and forgotten items. I sighed in relief and started to turn back towards the stairs. That's when I saw it. A shadowy figure standing at the far end of the room, just beyond the reach of the flashlight's beam. My heart pounded in my chest and I froze, unable to look away. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and unblinking. Fear surged through me, and I bolted up the stairs, nearly tripping in my haste. I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, my hands trembling. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, when suddenly the doorknob started to turn from the other side. Panic set in. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and wedged it under the doorknob, hoping it would hold. The doorknob rattled violently, and I could hear a faint scratching, like nails on wood. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. What was that thing? How did it get into my house? The scratching stopped, but the fear didn't. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. They said they would send someone right away. I could hear the doubt in the operator's voice, but I didn't care. I needed help. While waiting for the police, I paced the living room, glancing nervously at the basement door. The power flickered again, and for a moment, the house was plunged into darkness. I felt a presence behind me and spun around, but there was nothing there, just the storm raging outside. Minutes felt like hours, but finally I heard sirens. 2 officers knocked on the door, and I let them in, my relief palpable. They searched the house, starting with the basement. I stayed upstairs, too scared to go back down. After what felt like an eternity, they came back up. They didn't find anyone or anything unusual. No signs of forced entry, no shadowy figure. One of the officers suggested it might have been my imagination, a trick of the light and my mind playing games in the storm. But I knew what I saw. That shadowy figure was real. I could still feel its cold gaze, the memory of its presence sending chills down my spine. The police left, advising me to call if anything else happened. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made me jump. The storm eventually passed and dawn broke, bringing with it a fragile sense of safety. But the fear never fully went away. I couldn't forget the shadow in the basement, the way the doorknob turned on its own. I moved out of that house a few months later, unable to shake the feeling that I was never truly alone there. Even now, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I hear a creaking noise from the basement. The memory of that stormy night haunts me, a reminder that some shadows are more than just tricks of the light.
Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to a channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. Thanks.
One late night, I was driving back home from a friend's house. It was very dark and the roads were empty. I had been driving for a while, and my car's gas tank was almost empty. I saw a small, desolate gas station up ahead and decided to stop. The gas station looked old and run down. There was only one pump, and the lights flickered as if they were about to go out. I parked my car and got out, feeling a little uneasy. The wind was cold, and the night was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. I walked to the pump and started filling my tank. The gas station attendant was inside the small building, sitting behind the counter. He barely acknowledged me when I waved at him through the window. His face was pale, and his eyes looked tired and distant. There was something about him that seemed off, but I shrugged it off as just being tired. As I was filling the tank, I felt like I was being watched. I looked around and saw someone standing at the edge of the woods just beyond the gas station. It was too dark to see their face, but I could tell they were staring directly at me. A chill ran down my spine and I quickly finished pumping the gas. I walked into the gas station building to pay. The attendant still seemed strange, barely looking at me as he took my money. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, so I hurried back to my car. I got in, locked the doors, and drove off as quickly as I could. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. My heart stopped. The same figure I had seen standing at the edge of the woods was now sitting in my back seat, staring at me with empty eyes. Their face was pale, and their eyes were dark and hollow. They didn't move or say anything, just stared at me. Panic set in. I kept driving, not knowing what to do. My hands were shaking, and my mind was racing. I wanted to stop the car and get out, but I was too scared to slow down. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, I was imagining things. But every time I looked in the mirror, the figure was still there. I tried to remember if I had locked the car doors after getting in. I was sure I had, but how did this person get in? My mind was filled with questions and fear. I took deep breaths, trying to calm myself down, but it was no use. The figure's empty eyes seemed to bore into my soul, filling me with dread. I decided to drive to the nearest town, hoping to find help. The roads were still empty, and it felt like I was driving forever. The figure in the back seat didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. I felt trapped in a nightmare. Finally, I saw the lights of a small town up ahead. I drove straight to the police station, not caring about the speed limits or traffic lights. I pulled up to the station and jumped out of the car, running inside. I told the officer at the front desk about the figure in my back seat, my voice trembling with fear. The officer followed me outside, and I pointed to my car. But when we looked inside, the back seat was empty. There was no sign of the figure. The officer gave me a puzzled look, but I insisted that I had seen someone. He checked the car thoroughly, but there was nothing. Feeling embarrassed and confused, I apologized to the officer. He was kind and told me it was probably just my imagination playing tricks on me because it was late and I was tired. He offered to follow me home to make sure I felt safe, and I gratefully accepted. As I drove home with the police car following me, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. I finally reached home, thanked the officer, and went inside, locking all the doors and windows. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept checking the back seat of my car from the window. I couldn't get the image of those empty eyes out of my mind. The next morning, I felt exhausted and decided to call my friend to tell them what had happened. My friend listened patiently and tried to reassure me that it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. That figure at the gas station, with those empty eyes, was real. And even though I never saw it again, the memory of that night stayed with me, a chilling reminder of the unknown. I was on a cross-country road trip, taking in the beautiful scenery and enjoying the freedom of the open road. After driving for hours, I decided to find a secluded spot to camp for the night. I drove down a quiet dirt road, far away from any towns or people. The area was surrounded by thick woods, perfect for a peaceful night under the stars. As the sun set, I set up my tent and built a small campfire. I cooked a simple meal and enjoyed the silence of nature, listening to the distant hoots of owls and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It felt like I was the only person in the world, and I welcomed the solitude. After finishing my meal, I put out the fire and crawled into my tent. The night was chilly, so I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and quickly fell asleep, exhausted from the long day of driving. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange scratching noise outside my tent. At first, I thought it might be the wind or a small animal. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but the scratching grew louder and more persistent. My heart started to race as I listened carefully, trying to figure out what was making the noise. Gathering my courage, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The darkness was overwhelming, and I couldn't see anything beyond the faint glow of the moon. The scratching had stopped, but I felt a sense of unease. I scanned the area with my flashlight, but there was nothing there. No animals, no movement, just the silent, dark forest. I zipped the tent back up and tried to calm myself down. "It's just the wind," I whispered, trying to reassure myself. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The night seemed to drag on, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig making me jump. I eventually drifted off to a restless sleep, my mind filled with unsettling dreams. The next morning, I woke up early and stepped out of my tent, feeling a bit groggy. As I stretched and looked around, my heart sank. There were claw marks all over my tent, deep scratches that tore through the fabric. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized how close whatever it was had been to me while I slept. I looked around the campsite and saw something even more disturbing. The ground was littered with animal bones, arranged in strange, almost ritualistic patterns. Skulls, rib bones, and other remains were placed in circles and spirals, forming eerie shapes that made my stomach turn. Panic set in as I quickly packed up my tent and gear, my hands shaking. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I threw everything into my car and drove away, the tires kicking up dust as I sped down the dirt road. My mind raced with questions. What had been outside my tent? Who or what had left those bones and claw marks? As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me. But there was nothing. Just the empty road and the dense forest. I kept driving until I reached a small town, where I found a motel and checked in for the night. In the safety of my motel room, I tried to make sense of what had happened. I considered calling the local authorities, but what would I say? That I heard scratching noises and found claw marks and bones? They would think I was crazy. I decided to continue my road trip, but stuck to more populated areas from then on. The experience left me shaken, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every night, as I set up camp or checked into a motel, I made sure to double-check the locks and keep a flashlight within arm's reach. The memory of that night haunted me, a reminder that there are things in the world that we don't understand. Things that lurk in the darkness, just out of sight. Even now, when I think back to that secluded campsite, I can still hear the scratching, still see the claw marks and the eerie patterns of bones. It's a mystery that will stay with me forever, a chilling encounter with the unknown. My wife Sarah and I had always dreamed of owning a home. We had been saving for years, and when we finally had enough, we started looking for the perfect place. We wanted something with character, a place that felt like it had a story. So when we stumbled upon a beautiful Victorian house on Willow Lane, we thought it was our lucky day. The price was surprisingly affordable, almost too good to be true, and the house had all the charm we wanted: intricate woodwork, stained glass windows, and a large garden. We couldn't believe our luck. The realtor seemed eager to sell, which we chalked up to the sluggish housing market. He glossed over the house's history, mentioning only that it had been vacant for a few years. We didn't think much of it. We were too excited about finally owning our dream home. We signed the papers and moved in the following week. Our excitement, however, was short-lived. The first night, as we settled into our new home, we heard faint whispers. At first, we thought it was just the creaking of the old house. Victorian houses are known for their noises, after all. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, and seemed to come from all around us. It was unsettling, but we tried to ignore it, thinking it was just our imagination playing tricks on us in the new and unfamiliar space. As the days went by, the whispers continued, and other strange things started happening. I would wake up at night to find Sarah standing by the window, staring into the garden. When I asked her what she was doing, she would just shake her head and go back to bed, unable to explain her actions. It was as if she was in a trance. During the day, I noticed cold spots in certain parts of the house, even though it was the middle of summer. Sarah dismissed them, saying it was probably just poor insulation. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One evening, while unpacking in the attic, I found an old, dusty photo album. It was tucked away in a corner, hidden under a pile of old newspapers. Curious, I opened it and began to flip through the pages. At first, the photos were normal. Pictures of families celebrating holidays, children playing in the garden, and happy gatherings. But as I reached the last few pages, the images became disturbing. People with hollow eyes, expressions of terror, and what seemed to be shadowy figures lurking in the background. I showed the album to Sarah, who looked just as disturbed as I was. We decided to do some research on the house's history. We went to the local library and searched through old newspapers. What we found was chilling. The house had a dark past, filled with stories of mysterious deaths and disappearances. Previous owners had reported strange occurrences, and some had even left the house suddenly, abandoning all their belongings. After learning about the house's history, the strange events escalated. Doors would slam shut on their own, furniture would move, and we'd find objects in places we hadn't left them. The whispers grew louder, sometimes sounding like they were right next to us. We could no longer deny that something was seriously wrong. One night, we heard a loud crash from the basement. It sounded like glass shattering. With my heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate. What I found chilled me to the bone. A large mirror in the basement had been shattered, and the words "Get out" were scrawled on the wall in what looked like blood. I felt a cold breeze pass through me, and I knew we had to leave. The final straw came when Sarah woke up screaming, covered in scratches and bruises. She couldn't explain what had happened, but we knew we couldn't stay any longer. The house was not safe, and it felt like it was actively trying to harm us. We packed our bags in a hurry, grabbing only the essentials. As we were leaving, I felt a presence behind me, watching us, almost as if it were pleased to see us go. We didn't look back. We drove away and never returned. The house on Willow Lane remains abandoned to this day, a reminder of the horrors we escaped. The experience left us shaken. We moved to a small apartment in the city and tried to put the ordeal behind us. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear those whispers, and I wonder if we ever truly escaped the darkness that lurked in that house.
Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to a channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. Thanks.
My husband, Jake, and I had always wanted a secluded getaway. We both had demanding jobs and craved a place where we could escape the hustle and bustle of city life. So, when we found a quaint cabin deep in the woods, we jumped at the chance to buy it. The cabin was charming, with its rustic log exterior, a stone fireplace, and a porch that offered a stunning view of the surrounding forest. It was perfect. The realtor mentioned the cabin had a history, but we dismissed it as local folklore. After all, every old cabin has its stories, right? We were too excited about the prospect of our private retreat to worry about ghost stories. We signed the papers and moved in within a week. From the first night, we knew something was wrong. We heard scratching noises coming from the walls and ceiling. Jake tried to assure me it was just animals, maybe squirrels or raccoons, but the sounds were too deliberate, too menacing. They seemed to follow us from room to room, growing louder each night. It was as if something was trying to get our attention. During the day, the cabin was peaceful and serene, but as soon as the sun went down, the atmosphere changed. The noises became more frequent, and I started to feel a constant sense of unease. I could never shake the feeling that we were not alone. One evening, while Jake was out getting supplies, I decided to take a bath to relax. The warm water and the soothing lavender scent helped calm my nerves. As I soaked in the tub, I let my mind wander, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. Screamed and jumped out, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking. As I tried to calm down, I noticed the bathroom mirror was fogged up with the words "Leave now" written on it. My blood ran cold, grabbed a towel, wrapped it around myself, and ran out of the bathroom. When Jake returned, I told him what had happened. He didn't believe me at first, but when he saw the words for himself the next day, he finally agreed something was terribly wrong. We started to notice other strange occurrences. Objects would move on their own, cold spots would appear throughout the cabin, and we constantly felt like we were being watched. The once charming cabin now felt like a prison, and we were its captives. One night, we heard a low growling noise coming from the living room. It was a sound unlike anything I had ever heard before, deep, menacing, and filled with malice. We cautiously approached the living room, our hearts pounding in our chests. As we entered, we saw a dark, shadowy figure standing in the middle of the room. Its eyes glowed red, and it let out a bone-chilling scream. I felt paralyzed with fear, but Jake grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the door. We ran out of the cabin, our footsteps echoing in the silent night. We jumped into our car and sped away, leaving everything behind. As we drove away, I looked back and saw the shadowy figure standing on the porch, watching us with those terrifying red eyes. We never returned to the cabin, and it remains a dark, haunted memory. We later learned that the cabin was built on land that was once a burial ground, and the spirits of the disturbed graves were believed to haunt the property. The locals had always known about the cabin's dark history, but we had been too eager and too naive to listen. We sold the cabin as soon as we could, but the experience left a lasting mark on us. For months, I had nightmares about the shadowy figure and the cold hand on my shoulder. Jake and I grew closer as we helped each other heal from the trauma, but the fear lingered. We moved to a new home in the city and tried to put the ordeal behind us, but sometimes late at night I can still hear that growling noise in my dreams. Never spoke of the cabin again, and we vowed never to buy an old, secluded property without thoroughly researching its history first. The experience taught us a valuable lesson. Some places are haunted by more than just old memories. They are haunted by restless spirits, and sometimes those spirits do not want to be disturbed.